For 6 long years, Clara Whitfield had believed she would grow old and die alone on her small ranch outside Red Hollow, Nebraska. Then, on a cold evening in the autumn of 1882, a wounded stranger rode through her gate, carrying a letter written by the husband she had buried years ago. Clara stood frozen on the porch as the stranger came closer. Her 12-year-old son, Henry, stayed behind her, holding the sleeve of her faded blue dress. The setting sun burned red across the open plains, but the rider looked almost black against the light. His horse moved slowly, as if both animal and man had traveled far beyond their strength. Dust covered his long gray coat. His dark hair hung across his forehead, and an old scar ran from the corner of his left eye to his jaw. One of his hands pressed hard against his side, where a dark stain had spread across his shirt. But Clara barely noticed the blood. She was staring at the yellow envelope in his other hand. Her name was written across the front. Clara Whitfield. The letters were strong and slightly crooked. The last letter in her name leaned lower than the others. Clara knew that handwriting. She had seen it on feed orders, Christmas cards, and small notes left beside her morning coffee. It belonged to Thomas, the man she had loved since she was 19. It belonged to the husband who had died during a winter cattle drive 6 years earlier. The stranger stopped beside the porch and slowly removed his hat. "Mrs. Whitfield?" he asked. Clara could not answer at first. Her chest felt tight, and the porch seemed to move beneath her feet. "I am Clara Whitfield," she finally whispered. The man tried to dismount, but his injured side gave way. He fell from the saddle and struck the ground on one knee. Henry gasped. Clara stepped forward before fear could stop her. She caught the stranger beneath one arm and helped him stand. He was taller than Thomas had been, but he looked weak from hunger and loss of blood. "My name is Eli Mercer," he said. "I rode with your husband years ago." Clara looked again at the envelope. A date had been written on the back. 10 years earlier. Thomas had still been alive then. Henry had been only 2 years old. Their ranch had been little more than a cabin, a broken fence, and a dream stretching across empty land. "Why do you have my husband's letter?" Clara asked. Eli looked toward Henry, then back at her. "Because Thomas made me promise I would bring it to you if he never returned home." Clara's face turned pale. "He did return home," she said. "He lived another 4 years after that date. He worked this ranch. He raised his son. He died 6 years ago." Eli closed his eyes, as if the words had struck him harder than any bullet. "Then I am far later than I feared." Clara wanted to demand answers. She wanted to tear the letter from his hand and force him to explain every missing year. Instead, she saw his knees begin to shake. The ranch had taught Clara many hard lessons. One of them was that questions could wait when a man was bleeding. "Henry, open the door," she said. "Bring the clean cloth from the kitchen." The boy obeyed, though he kept watching Eli with careful eyes. Clara helped the stranger inside. The house was small but clean. A fire burned in the iron stove, and the smell of bean soup filled the room. Thomas's old rifle still rested above the fireplace, untouched since the day the sheriff brought his body home. Eli noticed it but said nothing. Clara guided him into a wooden chair. She cut open the side of his shirt and found a deep wound beneath his ribs. The bullet had passed through, but the skin around it was red and swollen. "You should be dead," she said quietly. "I have heard that before." "Who shot you?" "Men who did not want me reaching this ranch." Clara stopped washing the wound. Henry stood near the table, holding the folded cloth against his chest. "What men?" Clara asked. Eli looked at the windows before answering. 3 riders followed me from Fort Kearney. I lost them near the river, but they may still be searching." Clara's fear quickly turned to anger. "You brought dangerous men to my home." "I tried not to." Eli's voice was weak but honest. "I could have ridden south and saved myself trouble, but I have carried that letter for 10 years. I was not going to turn away when I was finally this close." He placed the envelope on the table. Clara stared at it. For 6 years, she had survived without Thomas. She had fixed fences during rainstorms, delivered calves through freezing nights, and stood alone against bankers who wanted her land. She had sold her wedding necklace to buy seed after a summer drought destroyed the corn. The hardest winter had come 2 years earlier. Henry had fallen sick, and Clara had spent every dollar she owned on medicine. She had burned 2 kitchen chairs when the firewood ran out. She had almost lost the ranch that spring. The bank manager, Silas Crow, had offered to buy the land for half its value. He had stood on the same porch where Eli now sat and told Clara that a woman could not manage a ranch forever. Clara had refused him. She had survived, but survival had taken nearly everything from her. Her hands were rough. Her eyes carried shadows. Laughter had become rare inside the house. Some nights after Henry was asleep, Clara still placed her hand on Thomas's empty side of the bed. She did not expect to feel him there. She only wanted to remember that once, someone had chosen to stay beside her. Now his handwriting rested only a few feet away. "What happened 10 years ago?" Clara asked. Eli leaned back and breathed through the pain. "Thomas and I worked a freight trail between Missouri and the western forts. He took the job because the ranch needed money. We were attacked near Black Creek by a gang that had been stealing army supplies." Clara frowned. "Thomas told me the freight work was peaceful. He did not want you to worry." That sounded like Thomas. He had always hidden his pain behind a smile. Eli continued. "During the attack, my horse was shot. I was trapped beneath it. Thomas turned back for me while everyone else kept riding. He pulled me free and carried me into the trees. He saved my life." Henry stepped closer. "My father did that." Eli looked at him. "Your father was the bravest man I ever knew." The boy lowered his eyes, but pride softened his guarded expression. "2 days later," Eli said, "Thomas gave me that letter. He said it contained something you needed to know. He wanted to tell you himself when he returned, but if anything ever happened to him, I was to deliver it." "Then why did you keep it for 10 years?" Clara asked. Eli's jaw tightened. "Because I was arrested before I could leave Missouri." Clara waited. "The gang blamed me for the stolen supplies. They paid 2 witnesses to lie. I spent 7 years in prison for a crime I did not commit." Henry looked shocked. Clara remained still. "After I was released," Eli continued, "I searched for Thomas. I worked in mines and cattle camps to pay for the journey. Every town gave me another rumor. I did not learn where this ranch was until 3 months ago." He glanced at the envelope. "I kept it wrapped inside my Bible. I never opened it. I never even held it near a fire when the nights were freezing." Clara touched the edge of the letter with one finger. "Why were those riders chasing you?" "The men who framed me learned I had returned. They believed Thomas may have written their names in the letter." "Did he?" "I do not know." The wind struck the side of the house. Somewhere outside, a horse gave a nervous cry. Clara looked toward the dark window. For the first time, she understood that the letter might hold more than words from a dead husband. It might carry a secret powerful enough to make men kill. Eli pushed himself up from the chair. "I should leave before they find me here." He took one step and nearly fell. Clara caught his arm. "You will not survive another mile. If I stay, you and the boy may be in danger." Clara looked at Henry. Then she looked at Thomas's rifle above the fireplace. She had spent 6 years believing she had nothing left to lose. But that was not true. She had her son. She had her land. And now she had a final message from the man who had built both dreams beside her. Clara lifted the rifle from its hooks and checked the chamber. "You will stay until morning," she said. "If those men come, they will learn that a woman who has buried her husband and fought 6 winters alone is not easily frightened." Eli stared at her with quiet respect. Henry placed another piece of wood into the stove. Clara sat at the table and slowly picked up the letter. Her fingers trembled as she turned it over. The seal was still unbroken. Outside, darkness covered the plains. Far beyond the fence, 3 small shapes appeared on the ridge. 3 riders had found the ranch. Clara moved quickly to the window and lowered the lamp flame until the room fell into dim orange light. Outside, the 3 riders remained on the ridge, dark against the night sky. Henry stood beside the stove, his face pale. Are they the men who followed you? Clara asked. Eli forced himself upright and looked through the narrow gap in the curtain. Yes. His voice was calm, but Clara saw fear in his eyes. One rider separated from the others and began moving slowly toward the ranch. The other two stayed near the ridge, watching the house. Clara took Thomas's rifle and handed Henry a small revolver from the kitchen drawer. The boy stared at it. I have never fired this. You will not fire unless I tell you, Clara said. Go into the pantry and stay behind the flour barrels. I am not leaving you. You are doing exactly what I say. Henry looked ready to argue, but Eli spoke before he could. Your mother needs to know you are safe. That is how you help her. Henry swallowed and nodded. He took the revolver and disappeared into the pantry. Clara turned to Eli. You cannot stand. I can stand long enough. He pulled his own revolver from beneath his coat, but his injured hand shook badly. The rider stopped outside the gate. Eli Mercer, a voice called through the darkness. We know you are in there. Eli closed his eyes for one brief moment. Clara stepped onto the porch with the rifle against her shoulder. The cold wind moved through her hair. The rider sat beneath a wide black hat. A red scarf covered the lower half of his face. This is private land, Clara called. Turn your horse around. The man gave a low laugh. We only want Mercer and the letter. There is no letter here. Then you will not mind if we search the house. Clara raised the rifle higher. Come through that gate, and you will not reach the porch. The rider studied her for several seconds. You must be Clara Whitfield. Clara's blood ran cold. The man knew her name. Thomas spoke of you, the rider said. He always said his wife was stubborn. Eli stepped into the doorway behind Clara. Leave her out of this, Rourke. The rider removed the scarf from his face. He was older than Clara expected. His skin was gray from age, and a long white scar crossed his chin. 10 years, Eli, he said. I thought prison would teach you to forget. It taught me exactly what kind of man you are. Rourke smiled. Give me the letter. No. Rourke looked toward the ridge. One of the distant riders lifted a rifle. Clara understood the warning. If you harm anyone on this ranch, she said, every sheriff between here and Fort Kearney will know your name. Rourke laughed again. Mrs. Whitfield, the law has known my name for 20 years. It has never helped much. Then his face became cold. You have until midnight. Bring Mercer and the letter to the old grain shed near the creek. If you refuse, we burn the ranch. He turned his horse and rode back toward the ridge. Clara remained on the porch until all three men disappeared into the darkness. Inside, she locked the door and faced Eli. Who is he? Jeremiah Rourke. He led the gang that stole the army supplies. Thomas and I saw him kill a guard during the attack. Clara tightened her grip on the rifle. Did Thomas write that in the letter? I do not know. You told me the letter only held something he wanted me to know. That is what he told me. Clara looked at the yellow envelope on the table. Then we open it now. Eli nodded. Clara sat beneath the weak lamp light. She slid a kitchen knife beneath the old seal and slowly opened the envelope. The paper inside had become thin with age. She unfolded it carefully. The first words were written in Thomas's familiar hand. My dearest Clara. Her breath caught. For a moment, the danger outside disappeared. She could almost hear Thomas speaking from across the table. She began reading aloud. I am writing this because there are truths I have been too afraid to bring home. I wanted to protect you from the darkness I saw on the freight trail, but silence can become its own kind of danger. Clara looked at Eli. He remained standing near the door, listening. She continued. Eli and I witnessed Jeremiah Rourke steal government rifles and murder a guard named Peter Sloan. Rourke knows we saw him. If anything happens to me, this letter must reach Sheriff Amos Grant in Red Hollow. Beneath the floor of our old grain shed, I buried a ledger taken from Rourke's wagon. It lists every stolen shipment, every payment, and every man who helped him. Clara stopped reading. The grain shed. That was where Rourke had ordered them to meet him. Eli's expression hardened. He knows about the ledger. Then why has he not taken it? Because he does not know where beneath the floor Thomas hid it. Clara returned to the letter. There was more. Clara, I am sorry for bringing this danger near you. I plan to return with the sheriff and end it. But if I fail, trust Eli Mercer. He saved my life as surely as I saved his. He is a good man, even if the world tries to tell him otherwise. Eli looked away. Clara's voice softened as she read the final lines. There is one more thing you must know. The North Pasture does not belong to the bank, no matter what papers they show you. I paid it in full before leaving. The true deed is hidden with the ledger. Never sell the ranch to Silas Crow. He knows Rourke, and he has waited years for me to disappear. Clara slowly lowered the page. Silas Crow, the bank manager who had tried to take her ranch. The man who had told her that a lonely widow could never survive. He has been working with Rourke, Clara whispered. Eli nodded. That would explain how Rourke found us so quickly. A faint sound came from the pantry. Henry stepped out, still holding the revolver. I heard everything. Clara rose. I told you to stay hidden. Mr. Crow came here last month, Henry said. He looked around the barn while you were feeding the cattle. I thought he was checking the fence. Clara's stomach twisted. He was searching for the deed. Eli reached for his coat. We need to get the ledger before midnight. You can barely walk, Clara said. I am still going. So am I. Eli shook his head. No. This is my land. Thomas hid that proof for me. I will not remain inside while other men decide what happens to my home. Henry stepped closer. I can ride to town and bring Sheriff Grant. Clara looked at her son. The road to Red Hollow was nearly 5 miles through open country. Rourke's riders could be anywhere. It is too dangerous. I know the dry creek path, Henry said. Papa showed it to me. Horses cannot be seen from the ridge there. Eli studied the boy. He is right. If he leaves through the back pasture, they may not see him. Clara wanted to refuse. Every part of her wanted to keep Henry beside her. But midnight was coming and they needed help. She placed both hands on her son's shoulders. You ride straight to Sheriff Grant. You do not stop for anyone. Henry nodded. Clara kissed his forehead and watched him slip out the back door. A few minutes later, she heard the soft sound of his horse moving through the pasture. Then she and Eli crossed the dark field toward the grain shed. The old building stood near the creek beneath a line of cottonwood trees. Its roof leaned to one side, and the door hung from a single hinge. Clara carried the lamp. Eli carried the shovel. Inside, dust covered the floorboards. Thomas's letter gave one final direction. 3 steps east from the center beam. Eli counted the steps and dropped to one knee. He pried up a loose board with the shovel. Beneath it rested a small metal box wrapped in rotting canvas. Clara pulled it free. Inside was the true deed to the North Pasture and a thick black ledger. Every page carried names, dates, and payments. Near the back, Clara found Silas Crow's name written again and again. A floorboard creaked behind them. Jeremiah Rourke stood in the doorway with a revolver in his hand. The other 2 riders appeared beside him. You saved me the trouble of searching, Rourke said. Eli stepped in front of Clara. Rourke smiled. Put the ledger down. Clara held it tightly against her chest. No. Rourke raised his revolver toward Eli. One dead husband should have taught you not to challenge men stronger than you. Clara's grief turned into a cold, steady fury. Thomas was stronger than all of you, she said. That is why you are still afraid of a letter he wrote 10 years ago. Rourke's smile vanished. Then a gunshot cracked through the night. The lamp shattered. Darkness swallowed the grain shed. The gunshot echoed through the grain shed as broken glass fell across the floor. Clara dropped behind an old feed barrel, still clutching the ledger against her chest. Eli threw himself beside her, ignoring the pain in his wounded side. For one terrible moment, no one moved. Then a man cried out near the doorway. "You fool," Rourke shouted. "Who fired?" "It came from outside," one of his riders answered. Another shot struck the wooden frame above Rourke's head. The outlaw cursed and stepped back into the darkness. Clara heard horses moving near the creek. Then a strong voice carried through the trees. "Jeremiah Rourke, drop your weapon and come out with your hands raised." Clara recognized the voice. Sheriff Amos Grant. Henry had reached town. Rourke fired toward the trees. The sheriff's men answered, forcing him and his riders back inside the shed. Eli leaned close to Clara. "When I move, crawl toward the rear wall." "You can hardly stand." "I do not need to stand for long." Before Clara could stop him, Eli rose and fired toward the doorway. Rourke ducked behind a support post. Clara crawled across the dusty floor and reached the back wall. There was a narrow opening where several boards had fallen away. She pushed the ledger through first, then squeezed outside. The cold night air struck her face. Henry was crouched behind a cottonwood tree with Sheriff Grant and 2 deputies. The boy ran toward her. "Mother!" Clara wrapped one arm around him while keeping the ledger in the other. "You did exactly what I asked." "I rode as fast as I could." Sheriff Grant looked at the book. "Is that the evidence?" "Yes, it has Rourke's name, Silas Crow's name, and every stolen shipment." The sheriff took the ledger and handed it to a deputy. "Keep this safe." Another shot came from the shed. Clara turned toward the building. Eli is still inside. Sheriff Grant raised his rifle. "Rourke," he called, "the ledger is already in my hands. You cannot destroy the proof now." Silence followed. Then Rourke pushed Eli through the doorway, with a revolver pressed against his neck. Blood covered Eli's shirt. His face was pale, but he remained standing. Rourke stayed behind him. "Drop your rifles," the outlaw ordered, "or Mercer dies." Clara stepped away from Henry. "Let him go." Rourke laughed. "You have caused enough trouble, Mrs. Whitfield. You lost the ledger. I can still leave with a horse and a shield." Eli looked at Clara. There was no fear in his eyes. Only trust. Rourke began moving toward the nearest horse. His 2 men followed, keeping their weapons aimed at the sheriff. Clara saw Eli's right hand move slightly. He was pointing toward the ground near Rourke's boot. Thomas's old grain rope lay half buried in the grass. Clara understood. She slowly stepped to the side. Rourke turned his head. "Stay where you are." Clara stopped. "You spent 10 years hiding from the truth," she said. "You killed men, stole land, and sent an innocent man to prison, but Thomas still defeated you." Rourke's face twisted with anger. "He was a weak rancher." "No, he was a man you could never frighten." Rourke pressed the revolver harder against Eli's neck. That was the moment Eli moved. He kicked the loose rope around Rourke's ankle and dropped his full weight to the ground. Rourke lost his balance. Clara rushed forward and struck his gun hand with the wooden stock of Thomas's rifle. The revolver fell into the grass. Sheriff Grant and his deputies moved in at once. Within seconds, Rourke was on his knees with his hands tied behind his back. His 2 riders dropped their weapons. Eli remained on the ground. Clara knelt beside him. His eyes were closed. "Eli." He did not answer. Her heart filled with terror. "Eli, open your eyes." He finally drew a weak breath. "I told you I could stand long enough." Clara laughed through her tears. Sheriff Grant helped carry him back to the house. By morning, Jeremiah Rourke and his men were locked in the Red Hollow jail. Silas Crow was arrested before noon. The ledger proved that he had helped sell stolen army supplies and had used false papers to claim land from struggling ranchers. The true deed Thomas had hidden saved Clara's north pasture. It also proved that the bank owed her years of stolen payments. For the first time since Thomas died, Clara no longer feared losing the ranch. But the money and land did not matter as much as the man lying injured in her spare room. Eli's fever rose for 3 days. Clara stayed beside him through every hour. She changed his bandages, cooled his forehead, and gave him water whenever he woke. Henry slept in a chair outside the door. On the 4th morning, Eli opened his eyes. Clara was sitting beside the bed, with Thomas's letter in her lap. "You stayed," Eli whispered. "So did you." He looked toward the window. "Rourke. In jail. The ledger. Safe with the sheriff." Eli closed his eyes again, but this time relief softened his face. "I suppose my promise is finally complete." Clara felt a sudden ache. "What will you do now?" "When I can ride, I will leave." The words struck harder than she expected. "Why?" "You have your land, you have your son. You no longer need a stranger bringing danger to your door." Clara stood and walked to the window. For 6 years, she had imagined that being strong meant needing no one. She had carried every burden alone because she believed there was no other choice. Now the thought of the ranch returning to silence frightened her more than any outlaw. "You are not only a stranger," she said. Eli watched her carefully. "You carried Thomas's final words for 10 years. You protected the letter when it would have been easier to destroy it. You came here wounded because you refused to break your promise." "That does not mean I belong here." Clara turned toward him. "Belonging is not decided by the past. It is decided by what a person chooses to do when he finally reaches the place he was searching for." Eli looked down at his scarred hands. "I do not have much to offer." "You offered your life. That was a debt to Thomas." Clara stepped closer. "What if I am asking you to stay for me?" Eli raised his eyes. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Then Henry appeared in the doorway. "You could help repair the south fence," the boy said. Clara looked at him. Henry shrugged. "It has been leaning since spring." A faint smile appeared on Eli's face. "I suppose that is serious work." "It is," Henry said, "and Mother burns every biscuit when she fixes fences alone." Clara tried to look offended, but Eli laughed. It was the first true laugh she had heard from him. The sound filled the room with warmth. Eli remained at the ranch through the winter. At first he stayed because his wound needed time to heal. Then he stayed because the barn roof needed repair. After that, he stayed because 2 calves were born during a snowstorm. By spring, no one spoke of his leaving. He worked beside Henry every morning. He taught the boy how to mend a saddle, follow tracks, and stay calm around frightened horses. He never tried to replace Thomas. Instead, he spoke of him often. He told Henry stories about his father's courage, kindness, and terrible singing voice. One afternoon, Henry brought Eli Thomas's old hammer. "My father used this," he said. "I think he would want you to use it too." Eli accepted it with both hands. "I will treat it with respect." Clara watched from the porch. For the first time, she understood that love did not always arrive to erase grief. Sometimes it arrived to sit beside it until the pain became easier to carry. That summer, Eli built a swing beneath the large elm tree near the house. Henry pretended he was too old for it, but Clara saw him using it every evening. Eli repaired the porch and planted wild roses beside the steps. Clara began wearing brighter dresses again. The people of Red Hollow noticed the change. Some whispered that a widow should not allow a former prisoner to live on her land. But Sheriff Grant made the truth known. Eli Mercer had been innocent, and his courage had helped bring down one of the most dangerous gangs in Nebraska. The whispers slowly became respect. One evening, nearly a year after Eli arrived, Clara found him standing beside Thomas's grave on the hill. He held his hat against his chest. "I kept the promise," he said softly, "but I do not know whether I have the right to ask for more." Clara stepped beside him. The sunset covered the plains in gold. "What more do you want?" Eli looked at her. "A home." Clara's eyes filled with tears. You already have one. I mean a place beside you. She took his hand. Thomas gave me a letter that protected my land. You gave me something he could not place inside an envelope. What was that? The courage to live again. Eli lowered his head until his forehead touched hers. I cannot promise an easy life. I have never needed an easy life. What do you need? You, Henry, this ranch, honest days and a light in the window at night. Eli kissed her gently. They married beneath the elm tree 2 weeks later. Henry stood beside them holding Thomas's letter. Sheriff Grant served as a witness, and nearly every family in Red Hollow came to the ranch. Clara wore a simple blue dress. Eli wore Thomas's old silver watch, which Henry had given him that morning. The years that followed still brought storms, sickness, and hard seasons, but Clara never again faced them alone. Henry grew into a strong and kind man. He later became sheriff of Red Hollow and kept Rourke's black ledger locked in his office as a reminder that truth could survive even when buried for years. Clara kept Thomas's letter above the fireplace. Whenever she looked at it, she did not only remember what she had lost. She remembered the stranger who had crossed 10 years of pain to deliver hope to her door. Many years later, Clara and Eli sat together on the porch while their grandchildren played beneath the elm tree. Did you ever think that letter would lead you here? Clara asked. Eli smiled and held her hand. No, I thought I was carrying a message to the end of a journey. He looked at the warm house, the wide ranch, and the family gathered around them. But it turned out I was carrying the beginning of one.